won't receive fair consideration from the opposition, and they're directed at a nominee who served his country during both Democratic and Republican administrations. I expect we'll hear more unfair attacks and character smears today, but I'd like to point out a few egregious ones that we've already heard. One of my colleagues suggested that Mr. Patel called the police officers that protected the Capitol on January 6 cowards in uniform, end of quote, or quote unquote. Now, this is completely false. Anyone can listen to this same interview that he gave to hear what he actually said. He said, senior Pentagon leadership who failed to mobilize the National Guard were, quote unquote, cowards in uniform. His comments had absolutely nothing to do with the people in blue. Mr. Patel has also been accused of mismanaging hostage rescue missions, particularly one in Africa. But numerous national security officials, including General Tata, who was directly involved, have said it is, quote unquote, irresponsible to say Mr. Patel jeopardized the mission and that Mr. Patel, quote, played a large role in the success of the mission, unquote. Mr. Patel has also been accused of having an enemies list. Mr. Patel does not call his book appendix an enemies list, and he said that it is not about political revenge. He believes, as I believe, that those who have abused their positions in government should be called out for breaking the public trust. It's very clear that my Democrat colleagues made their minds up about Mr. Patel long before he was given an opportunity to be heard. And now my colleagues attack Mr. Patel and demand that he come back before this committee to answer for reforms and personnel changes that the Trump administration has begun at the FBI. Of course, it's outrageous, as we all know, to suggest that a nominee should come before the Senate to answer questions for an agency's action that occurred before he gets to be head of that agency. But more importantly, FBI reforms, and yes, even firings, are needed. The Trump administration is cleaning house at the FBI because the FBI is and has been for years infected with political bias and whistleblower retaliation, and I've got a lot to say about that in just a minute. It's long past overdue for the whistleblowers who's been affected by FBI misconduct to be given a voice. So now I'm going to take some time sharing statements from whistleblowers who were retaliated against some of the FBI officials that Trump has recently fired. Now, I'd like to have the White House and my Republican colleagues take note of this, because I think some of these people should be reinstated because of how justly they've been treated. And like you've heard me so many times say, whistleblowers are treated like a skunk at a picnic. And I hope my Democrat colleagues will learn a lesson about how the FBI has previously treated whistleblowers, both under Republican administrations and Democrat administrations, so that we don't have this happening again. One whistleblower said, quote, people like these have harmed the noble mission of the Bureau. They've created turmoil, and their personal agenda has spread throughout the Bureau over the last decade in service of the country. We should insist on removing them from the FBI, not tomorrow, but right now, end of quote. Remember, he said the last decade. That covers presidents of both parties. A second whistleblower said, quote, Michael Nordwall had oversight and approval authority over Arctic frost, which required a critical assessment of alleged basis for opening an investigation of this magnitude and political significance. The failure to raise an objection, much less critically assess Thibault's motives, alone should be grounds for dismissal, end of quote. And for my Democrat colleagues, you've heard me talk about Thibault for the last 2 years. One of the few people that I ever know that Ray fired for doing things wrong. And I had to point that out to him. Now pay attention to this one. A third FBI whistleblower said, quote, on January 6, 2021, I took leave and went to see the president speak on the ellipse. Later, my wife and I were among a crowd southwest of the Capitol. Even though we were involved in no violence, never set foot on the steps of the leading to the Capitol building, and never entered it, I self-reported my presence to the FBI after seeing violence in the news reports. The FBI did nothing at first, but more than a year later, suspended my security clearance. Under supervision of Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins, investigators questioned my co-workers about whether I ever vocalized support for President Trump or objections to COVID-19 vaccine. I was forced to take early retirement to pay bills and have essentially been sidelined from employment opportunities due to the FBI abuse of the clearance system to target me for my political beliefs, end of quote. Now you're going to hear these names, Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins, crop up here quite often. So I don't know who they are, but they're obviously not very good people to have in the FBI when they take retaliation as they have. A fourth FBI whistleblower and a registered Democrat said, quote, as a security division employee, I witnessed abuses committed against multiple employees by FBI senior leaders, particularly by Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins. I also saw a security division retaliated against 5 of its own employees for protesting these unlawful practices. Because I spoke out against these abuses, Perkins and Timothy Dunnan suspended my security clearance, costing me my job and continuing employment, totaling approximately $700,000 in lost wages and retirement benefits, end of quote. A fifth whistleblower said, quote, although some of my FBI leaders who abused the clearance process, like Dina Perkins and Jeff Veltri, have already left, they weren't alone. Timothy Dunham approved Perkins' wrongdoings and engaged in his own. While most security division employees are fantastic, some FBI leaders still remain within the security and integrity and investigation section who will continue this abuse of the process. From FBI whistleblower Marcus Allen, quote, Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins caused the suspension of my security clearance because I questioned whether the FBI director was truthful to Congress and whether the FBI was obeying the laws and constitutions in the January 6, 2021 investigations. Their actions left me without pay for 2 years, while other FBI officials prevented me from having other income. Although the FBI ultimately reinstated my clearance and settled my lawsuit, my career at the FBI was over, and the financial and emotional damage to me and my family will never be completely restored. Why should you have to hire a lawyer and sue just because you use your constitutional right of free speech? Another FBI whistleblower said, quote, after I was assigned to review Marcus Allen's security clearance case, I noticed the file was missing relatively. I'm going to start this quote over. After I was assigned to review Marcus Allen's security clearance case, I noticed the file was missing relative communication of Jeff Veltri, who ordered the opening of the case. Dina Perkins and FBI attorney Tasha Gibbs. Allen was entitled to those communications, which were evidence that his clearance suspension was retaliatory. Shortly after I completed the vast majority of work on the communication recommending Allen's reinstatement, the Allen case was reassigned to another adjudicator, and I was transferred to a different unit, apparently in reprisal for reporting the wrongdoing in the Allen suspension. I soon resigned from the FBI to avoid further retaliation. I believe that Veltri, Perkins, and Gibbs were responsible for retaliating against Allen, and that Giuliani, Arzini, Perkins, and Gibbs were likely responsible for retaliation against me, end of quote. From FBI whistleblower Garrett O'Boyle, quote, I faced retaliation from junior, mid, and senior level, unquote, leaders in the FBI. More than 29 months later, I'm still indefinitely suspended without pay and benefits. Other whistleblowers have since confirmed that the FBI intentionally stranded me in the middle of a move and withheld our possessions to maximize the pain of my suspension. A new era of accountability and true whistleblower protection to the FBI is long overdue. FBI officials like Sean Clark, Sean Fitzgerald, Jeff Berkebile, Dina Perkins, Jeff Veltri, Jennifer Moore, Michael Snyders, Timothy Dunham, and other leadership up to Christopher Wray are responsible for what happened to me and my family, ensuring they no longer work at the FBI isn't retribution, it's responsible leadership. From FBI whistleblower Steve Friend, Jacqueline McGuire was promoted to upper echelons of the FBI after sending federal agents to arrest nonviolent Catholic pro-life protester Mark Houck at gunpoint. As someone who lost my career by blowing the whistle on these kinds of abuses and needlessly risky tactics for cooperative subjects, I was offended by her being rewarded rather than held accountable. Her dismissal is a small step towards ending the FBI's weaponization and should come sooner, end of quote. From FBI whistleblower Mike Zoomer, quote, after witnessing federal prosecutors favor a sexual predator district attorney who used the power of his office to sexually abuse vulnerable women, I reported their wrongdoing to the presiding federal judge. Although the allegations weren't classified, the FBI suspended and later revoked my security clearance. The U.S. attorney responsible for the misconduct was named by President Biden to lead the Department of Justice criminal investigation, and the FBI special agent in charge responsible for the FBI's retaliation against me was promoted to be the third highest FBI official. He soon retired after he harassed a young female subordinate. Meanwhile, I went through an 8-year process to be reinstated, only to have the Biden DOJ affirm the FBI's revocation of my security clearance in December 2024, finalizing my removal. See how removing a security clearance is a tool to retaliate and ruin people professionally. And lastly, I know you're tired of listening to this, so that's why I said, and lastly, from another FBI whistleblower, quote, I've watched the FBI become an institution, not, quote unquote, of the people, but of a select few who know the, quote unquote, system and process and use it to their advantage. Those people need to leave. As a whistleblower, I stand ready to help return the FBI to its earlier days of glory and return America's trust in what was an incredible institution, end of quote. Now, how can anybody listen to these statements from the FBI to know that there's a culture that just is not totally in tune with what law enforcement agency ought to do and conclude that everything is okay? These law enforcement agencies are out of control, drunk on power, and blinded by political infection. It's time to force them to recognize they answer to Congress and we the people. And those who retaliated against whistleblowers should be fired full stop by colleagues who think otherwise of protecting these whistleblowers. And I hope this message gets to President Trump. My Democratic colleagues hounded Patel to say he'd stand up to Trump. Well, these brave whistleblowers stood up to the last administration and they suffered retaliation. So why aren't my Democrat colleagues running to defend them and demanding the wrongdoers be held accountable? This administration must hold the bad actors accountable, fire them if necessary, give whistleblowers their security clearance back. President Trump, I hope you hear that. Put them in a position they were in before they had their retaliation. President Trump, I hope you hear that. If you can hire people, you can reinstate people, President Trump. That's part of what this committee ought to be focused on. Solutions to the rampant weaponization and whistleblower retaliation. These are two issues that Kash Patel is perfectly suited to fix because he's lived those issues. Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley. After reviewing Kash Patel's record and meeting with him, questioning him at this hearing, I'm even more convinced that he has neither the experience, the judgment, nor the temperament to lead the FBI. A little history. 50 years ago, Frank Church led an effort to investigate the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They came up with a sweeping reform and conclusion. Congress passed a law limiting the FBI director to a single term of 10 years, subjecting the appointment to the advice and consent of the Senate. These actions were taken specifically to ensure that FBI director remains apolitical and is shielded from outside influence, and that no FBI director amasses the kind of power that J. Edgar Hoover, the founder of the FBI, exercised when he had wiretaps on Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights leaders and branded them as communist. For the last half century, this law has served its purpose. At Mr. Patel's hearing, one of my Republican colleagues suggested that consideration of an FBI director is a, quote, shirts and skins game, quote unquote. That is clearly incorrect if you look at the record. I've served on this committee for more than 20 years during the consideration of 4 FBI director nominations, Bob Mueller twice, Comey, and Wray before this one. Each of these directors was a Republican, and I voted for all of them. Some game of shirts and skins. What it boils down to is this agency should be above politics. What we have just heard from the chairman is an invitation for a political free-for-all if Kash Patel is chosen as the head of this FBI. I will not be surprised when my Republican colleagues again claim that the Democrats have weaponized the FBI, as we've already heard, despite the fact for the last 50 years, every single Senate-confirmed head of the FBI has been a Republican. Even former Chris Wray, former director, has been a frequent target of outrage. My Republican colleagues conveniently never mention that Director Wray is a lifelong Republican, nominated to the position by Republican President Donald Trump, and confirmed to the position, get this, with the unanimous support of Senate Republicans. Unanimous. As a reminder, President Biden kept Director Wray, a Republican appointed by President Trump, in that position. But because he did not do his bidding, President Trump forced Wray out and nominated Mr. Patel, an inexperienced loyalist to the Trump administration. It turns out that Mr. Patel is already seeking retribution on behalf of President Trump, despite his status as a private citizen. As I revealed earlier this week, multiple whistleblowers have disclosed to my staff highly credible information indicating that Mr. Patel, a civilian, is personally directing the ongoing purge of senior law enforcement officials at the FBI. The ramifications of these terminations are dangerous, and they go beyond Mr. Patel's fitness for office. This purge has greatly weakened the FBI's ability to protect the country from national security threats and made America less safe. This week, I invited the head of the organization that represents FBI agents to come to my office and talk to me about the morale at the FBI. 2 women came and visited with me. Both of them had served as FBI agents for long periods of time, one for 22 years and another for 17 years, and they both were proud to tell me their fathers were FBI agents before them. They said to me they have never seen this kind of thing happen in the transition of one president to another when it comes to the FBI. There is only one person, nominally and officially, who is political at the FBI, the director. All the others are professional and career employees. One political person. But now there's been requests from this administration, for example, to produce the names of all of the agents and staff at the FBI who worked on the January 6th insurrection mob that assaulted the Capitol. Think about that for a second. 38,000 employees at the FBI. How many do you think worked on that case? 5,000 names. 5,000 names they want to disclose. It's understandable that these FBI agents are worried. They realize that the people who were engaged in that mob action on the Capitol, many of them were dangerous people, despite the full pardon given to them by Donald Trump. Let me tell you about one of them, just to give you an example. And if you question whether the FBI agents should be reluctant to have their identities and the identities of their families made public, his name was Guy Reffitt. He was the first defendant to stand trial on charges related to January 6. Sentenced to 87 months in prison for bringing a firearm into the Capitol that day. Reffitt's 19-year-old son, Jackson, turned him into law enforcement after the attack. Jackson also indicated that Reffitt had threatened to shoot him personally and his sister Peyton if they reported him to authorities. After receiving a pardon from President Trump, Reffitt attended Kash Patel's Senate Judiciary Committee meeting in this room. He posted on social media the following, and I quote, "Present and in support of Kash Patel as the leftist commies continue to spew lies, misinformation, and disinformation, my man, clean house Kash." We are inviting a political disaster if we put Kash Patel into this job. Can you imagine having worked for the FBI all your life, taking an oath that you're ready to give your life in defense of this country, be involved in all of the assignments that you were assigned to, and then comes a new president, Donald Trump, and wants to see the names of whether you were one of the people who was involved in the January 6th investigation, the largest criminal investigation in the history of the United States. I think this is outrageous. If we have respect for these agents, show it. To invite this political warfare that's been described already this morning is to the detriment of the men and women who are risking their lives for us in this agency. We have a list here of 6 executive assistant directors who have been purged already from the FBI. I asked the FBI agents, has this ever happened before with a new president? No, never happened before. These are top FBI officials who oversaw the FBI's work combating international and domestic terrorism, cybercrime, drug trafficking, and violent crime. In the FBI's long history, this has never happened before. Keep in mind, one political appointee, the director, all others career. The leaders who've been forced out are all career FBI officials who've worked their way up in the ranks and have decades of experience. And that's only the beginning. Acting Director, Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove, apparently acting at Mr. Patel's direction, has asked for a list of FBI personnel who worked on any matters relating to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. He is the transition leader, or was a transition leader for the Trump administration. Meanwhile, 1,600, including one of the individuals I just described to you, January 6 defendants who were given blanket pardon by Trump are on the loose. Think about that. A man who brought the gun into the Capitol, 87-month sentence, blanket pardon by Donald Trump, and now they wanted full disclosure of the names of the FBI agents who were involved in this case. It is outrageous that these sworn FBI agents, who were simply doing the jobs assigned to them, now fear for their livelihoods and their safety and the safety of their families. It is unacceptable for a nominee with no role in government to personally direct the unjustified, potentially illegal firing of dedicated, nonpartisan FBI officials. And if these allegations are true, Mr. Patel has come dangerously close to perjury before this Senate Judiciary Committee. Why do I say that? During the hearing, when he was asked about possible terminations of the FBI by Senator Booker, Mr. Patel said, "I don't know what's going on right now over there." Mr. Patel seems to be unable to wait for Senate confirmation to carry out his plan of retribution on behalf of President Trump. This is a private citizen, Patel, with no role in government, allegedly directing baseless firings of career public servants, and then misleading this committee about his actions. Given the serious nature of these allegations, I've asked the DOJ Inspector General to investigate. I urge my Republican colleagues to take these allegations seriously. I know you want to be loyal to your president. I know you want to vote for all of his nominations. I know none of you want a call from Elon Musk reminding you what he might do to somebody who votes the wrong way. But this really gets down to the heart of the future of an agency that is critical to the security of this nation. This is not the only time Mr. Patel misled the committee under oath. At his hearing, he implausibly told me he could not recall the name Stu Peters, an anti-Semitic Holocaust denier. Patel, under oath, said, "I can't recall his name." This is simply not credible, considering that Mr. Patel appeared on Mr. Peters' podcast 8 times. Couldn't pick the name out of it. Stu Peters? No, I don't think I know that man. 8 times. And Mr. Peters has since revealed that he and Mr. Patel directly communicate via their personal cell phones, quote, constantly, close quote. Stu Peters? Say the name again? Don't recognize it. Mr. Patel also claimed he didn't have anything to do with the recording of the so-called January 6th prison choir, those who were convicted of assaulting people and trespassing on the United States Capitol on January 6th. Here's what he told Steve Bannon, and I quote, "We got this idea to record the January 6 prisoners who recite the national anthem every night from the DC prison. Then we took that to the studio, so we mastered and digitized it." And he said he had nothing to do with it under oath. Mr. Patel has demonstrated a lack of sound judgment by associating with extremist figures like Mr. Peters, who have well-documented histories of racist, anti-Semitic, and conspiratorial statements. But now, somehow, my colleagues on the other side are silent. Mr. Patel clearly lacks the temperament to lead the FBI. Don't take it from me. Read his own words. I wonder if any of my Republican colleagues accepted my invitation to read this book, and I did read it. Government Gangsters. In this book, Mr. Patel published an enemies list of 60 people whom he calls, quote, members of the deep state, whatever the hell that is, and accuses of being, quote, corrupt actors of the first order. This list includes many distinguished public servants, both Democrats and Republicans alike. What they share in common is the misfortune of having crossed paths with Patel. There's one of them I'm going to highlight, and many of the people on the panel know him, Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller is an extraordinary man. Yes, he's a Republican. Yes, I voted for him to be director of the FBI. He finished his college career and enlisted in the Marine Corps to serve in Vietnam. He received a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star for his combat duty. Came back, worked as a prosecutor, worked his way up in the Department of Justice, and became the director of the FBI. He took over just days after 9/11. I worked with him for years. I respect him completely, and we all should respect him, if for nothing else, his service to our country in combat in Vietnam. And now he is on the enemies list of Kash Patel. Mr. Patel gives no quarters when he disagrees with someone. He's called Democrats, quote, vindictive, evil, and vicious. And then there is his social media posts repeatedly attacking Republican senators for not voting right and not following MAGA orthodoxy. During the previous administration, my Republican colleagues were outraged by Biden judicial nominees' social media posts. And they deemed poetry written by a nominee in college 30 years ago as disqualifying him to serve on the bench because it showed, quote, Marxist ideology. 30 years ago, wrote a poem. Be careful. Where is the outrage now for Mr. Patel, who has launched disgusting attacks on everyone from Elon Musk to LeBron James? Mr. Patel has also displayed a startling disdain for the agency he's been nominated to lead. He wants to, quote, shut down the FBI, Hoover Building on day one, reopen it the next day as a museum of the deep state, quote, unquote. He falsely claimed that the FBI was planning January 6th for a year before it happened. His conspiratorial theories just keep bounding out in his book and otherwise. He can't stop. And he's been clear about what he wants to do with the FBI's vast surveillance and investigative power, saying, quote, we're going to come after the people in the media. Mr. Patel has been open about his plans to dismantle the FBI and seek retribution, and he's already begun that mission as a private citizen, targeting senior FBI officials. Consider for a moment, if he is successful in this nomination, his first meeting of the head of the as head of the FBI with the men and women who are sworn to uphold the law and serve at his direction. Think about the morale in that room in light of what's going on. Mr. Patel's directives have already thrown the Bureau into chaos. Senior executives who collectively have hundreds of years of experience have been forced out. Thousands of line agents across the country are living in fear of losing their jobs simply because they did the job they were assigned to do. How does any of this make America safer? The American people need an FBI director focused on keeping the public safe from terrorism, drug trafficking, and violent crime, not petty personal grievances. I yield.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Let me start by disagreeing with the notion that what took place with respect to the cases against President Trump was weaponization. I know that's the Republican theory of the case, but the other reason why the FBI and the Department of Justice would investigate Trump for crimes is because Trump was doing crimes. And there was adequate predication to pursue investigation of those crimes. And indeed, in every case that I'm aware of in which those cases were allowed to go to judgment, the president was convicted. So we can't allow the weaponization narrative to just remove the notion that the guy was investigated and prosecuted for crimes because he did the crimes. Once you start with the notion that Trump is not a criminal but a victim, you then have to invent the conspiracy that victimized him. And once you've propagated that conspiracy, you then have to find who the conspirators are. So then you have to go after FBI agents and DOJ folks in order to prop up that theory. The way that ended in Soviet Russia was with show trials of the individuals who were allegedly in the conspiracy. The way that ends in Trump's America is with agents and prosecutors forced out in mass purges that may well, as the Ranking Member Durbin has pointed out, been driven by Kash Patel as a private citizen. So starting with that point, there are three reasons why Kash Patel is extremely dangerous. One is all of his wild MAGA behavior. This is a guy whose judgment is beyond questionable. It's appallingly bad. We have a lot of quarrel about whether his enemies list is an enemies list and whether we're smearing the guy by saying that his enemies list is an enemies list. Here's what he said about it. He showed his enemies list and said, "The manhunt starts tomorrow." If they're not your enemies, why would you start a manhunt against them? He called them the criminals themselves and showed a picture of his enemies list. If criminals aren't your enemies, as head of the FBI, who are? He retweeted a video showing him chainsawing the heads off of people on his enemies list. If you're chainsawing the heads off of people, are they not your enemies? So the invention that this is not an enemies list requires people to go into just fantasy land. And these are his own statements. These aren't our accusations. These are Patel's own words. Going after people in the media, impeaching judges who disagree with us, shutting down the FBI Hoover building, on and on and on. This guy is a flagrant extremist with appallingly bad judgment. Second point, we don't know enough about this mischief yet. There are real open questions. We've never in this committee had a person come for a serious senior law enforcement position who had testified in a grand jury criminal matter, and we don't know what he testified about. He's entitled to tell us. That's basic grand jury Rule 6E law. But this side of the committee is completely covering that up. We have absolutely no statement from Patel about what his grand jury testimony was. And he's at liberty to give that to us. He just won't. And Republicans won't tell him to. So he gets away with it. He pled the Fifth. You don't get to plead the Fifth without a real and genuine concern that you can be prosecuted for a crime. What crime? We're entitled to know. We've never had somebody come through this committee for a high senior law enforcement position who had pled the Fifth. He's got the right to do that, of course. We've got the right to know. And by the way, when he exercises the right to do that in a civil proceeding, that entitles the jury to draw the adverse inference that what he is covering up in the civil proceeding with his Fifth Amendment assertion is against his interests. A judge will instruct a jury about that adverse interest, and we're not supposed to draw an adverse interest in this committee when we're not told about his Fifth Amendment assertion. There's all this weird stuff that's come up since about investments in Chinese companies in the Cayman Islands vesting while he will be FBI director. If the guy is supposed to be investigating Chinese intrusion into our intelligence faculties, if we're trying to investigate Chinese fentanyl trafficking into our country, why do we want an FBI director who is somewhere between $1 and $5 million into a Chinese company through a Cayman Islands shell? And then there are the Russia connections. I'll get to those at the end. We don't have to, where everybody's fond of saying these are Democratic smears. Actually, go to the Trump appointees who worked with this guy. What are they warning us? They're warning us, Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton, I didn't think he was qualified. I was forced to hire him. That's some recommendation from a colleague. His deputy, Charles Kupperman, Patel's ideas are ludicrous. He's absolutely unqualified for this job, untrustworthy, an absolute disgrace to even consider an individual of this nature. Definitely you want that on your resume by way of a recommendation from a former supervisor. Attorney General Barr said Patel has virtually no experience that would qualify him to be the deputy director of the FBI, and now he's back as the director of the FBI. And Trump's CIA director, Gina Haspel, threatened to resign rather than allow this guy into her office as her deputy. And if you go beyond the Trump appointees who are warning us about this guy, you can go to the last time he testified in court, which was in Colorado, and here's what the court found about him. That Patel was not a credible witness, that his testimony was illogical, and it was completely devoid of any evidence in the record. Okay, I've been an attorney general, and I've been a United States attorney, and I've put state police troopers on the stand, and I've put FBI agents on the stand. If at the end of a case, a judge made findings like this about a law enforcement witness that I put on the stand, there would be follow-up. I would want an explanation of why this witness was so incredible that findings like that were made by the judge. It would be a significant issue with respect to that witness's continued performance in office. And here's a guy who's been found to be completely incredible by a judge in his testimony, and we're acting as if that's nothing. That's not Democrats. That's a judge in Colorado. So the last thing I'll say is I think we need to begin to prepare ourselves for Trump Russia 2.0.